Hello and welcome into this week's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Higley. Today's episode wraps up our programming series where we're going to discuss the core training methods. So we've talked about how to structure a training year and how to structure training blocks. And we've discussed periodization models. But today we're going to dive into the core training methods. So how do we actually fill out a training block? These are the tools of the trade. Okay, these are the things that actually push the adaptation, the things that we're going to prescribe inside the gym, and how we are going to elicit stress to be able to adapt, to be stronger, to be more powerful, to be more conditioned, and to just be a better everyday athlete. So by the end of this episode, I want you to understand why these training methods exist, how to use each one, and when to use each one, and how they can coexist together to build a complete, well-rounded training program. So first and foremost, these methods exist because one stimulus alone is not able to drive every adaptation that's needed. Adaptations that we might be looking for, outcomes that we might be searching for, are strength, speed of force production and power, muscle mass, work capacity, and resistance to fatigue. Each of these require different loads, different intent behind them, different rest periods, different recovery between sessions, and different frequency. We talked about last week how 3x10 for everything is not effective at writing a program. If we go down the board and we write 3x10, we're not going to drive the adaptation that we're searching for. Also, people will mistake that intensity of a given movement, so the weight on the bar, is just that weight. It's not the physiological response inside the body that's now being challenged to push you to the next step of getting stronger, of being more resistant to that load. And then whenever we think of conditioning, we think of conditioning a lot of times as either simple, mundane cardio or all out, max effort, push yourself to the limit, session after session, week after week. But that's not the case. So today I want to go through and break down some of the core main training sessions that actually work to build programs. These are the things that I start with. They're cookie cutter. They work well because they're effective, because there's actually tangible evidence behind them that shows they're going to push that adaptation, because they use the rep ranges and the rep schemes and the set schemes and the rest periods that we talked about in last week's episode to push that adaptation. They use the intensity and the load on the bar to drive that stress response. So first, let's talk about max effort training. This is the max effort method, and its sole goal is to build absolute strength. Purpose behind it is to improve maximal force production, your efficiency of the neurons to fire, the muscle contraction, and recruit high threshold motor units. This is lifting heavy near your limits. Typically 1 to 3 reps. Occasionally you will see it stretch to 5 reps. But here we're going to have adequate rest, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Longer rest periods than you would generally think. And each rep is very high focus, done with precision, done with impeccable technique and impeccable form. Your breathing is on point. You're mentally in the zone, and you are dialed in to do that repetition or those sets. Now, strength is a skill. It can be trained. Heavy loading teaches the nervous system better coordination, the ability to produce higher forces, and improved confidence under load. Max effort is not maxing out to failure. It's not grinding through repetitions. It's not failing week after week or session after session. That's not the case. If you are failing during max effort work, you are not doing that technique correctly. Very rarely do any of the athletes that I work with fail a rep. It's done with precision, and we push to the limit not at the limit or above the limit. Max effort is also not bodybuilding. It's not generating a ton of fatigue. It's about training strength, the ability to get stronger and produce higher forces. Now, in my programming, in conjugate programming, max effort uses a number of variations that rotate on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So if we're looking at lower body max effort, we might use a SSB squat to a box, and then we might use a straight bar to straps or to a pin, and then we might do a front squat, and then we might do a deadlift. That's 4 weeks in a row. We've changed the movement. The set and rep scheme has stayed consistent. We've worked up to a peak of 1 to 3 reps with 90 to 95 to 98% of our 1RM, and we've achieved the goal for that day. For upper body, same thing. Okay, we might do a floor press. We might do a neutral bar press. We might do close grip to a strap, or we might do a board press. Those are 4 different variations. They're all changing week to week. Now, from a real world coaching perspective, most athletes don't need to use this method the way it was intended by Louis Simmons and Westside Barbell. We don't need to peak. We don't need to risk injury and push ourselves to that 98%. So I will modify this in a way that uses submaximal loads. So we're not going to 100%. We're going to 95, as I said, or 90%. And we might do 3 reps. We might do 5 reps. But things that are lower in weight, but still with impeccable precision and impeccable technique. Still training and maintaining that high force capacity. And the goal with max effort work is we keep this in whether we are training to get strong in a strength block, whether we are working to compete in a running event or a running race. Okay, we're going to keep max effort in because we need to maintain strength. From a longevity perspective, this is why this is so important. The ability to maintain strength as you get older, the ability to use those high threshold motor units is going to prevent a cascade of events that lead to poor health outcomes. Your ability as a 50, 60, 70-year-old to avoid tripping because you have the strength to move that foot, to get into position, to avoid slipping on the ice. Your ability to back squat with load, maybe not heavy load, but at 85 years old, to put load on your spine to maintain bone strength and bone density is incredibly important and a huge factor for long-term health and long-term fitness. So maintaining strength is super important. We're going to maintain that. The stronger you can get, the better your submaximal work is going to be. That's important, right? Relative strength goes up. The best way to increase your 10 rep bench press is to get stronger. The best way to do more pull-ups is to get stronger. And now we can do more reps because the relative load is now a lesser percentage, right? So strength is the backbone. Strength is that centerpiece. And that's something that's going to be in any program that I write, is we're going to focus on getting strong. Now, second method is a fun one. This is dynamic effort method. Here we are expressing that strength that we've developed in the first phase, and we're expressing it efficiently. Purpose of this is to improve our rate of force development, improve our bar speed, and improve our technical efficiency. This is where we build power. So what is the dynamic effort method? It is moderate loads, somewhere in the ballpark of 50 to 75% of your 1 rep max. It's low reps, short rest, with high intention over the load. We are trying to move that bar as fast as we possibly can through space. Now, why does this exist? And that's because strength that can't be expressed is wasted. We've worked hard during our max effort movements to get stronger, now we need to express that. We need to show how fast we can move. Faster force application improves your athleticism, it improves the repetition quality, and it improves your fatigue resistance under that load. This is a method that's for athletes, for hybrid athletes, for power and strength athletes, and generally anyone who wants to feel usable strength. I would even argue to some extent bodybuilders would benefit from doing more athletic dynamic effort movements just to improve their ability to fire muscles fast. And it's that old, you look great, what can you do with it, right? This is that what can you do with it? How quickly can you express your ability to produce force and to produce strength? Now, from a use perspective, right, this keeps lifts crisp. It has a very low joint stress. Your low back is not going to bark up. Your hips aren't going to bark up because the load is so much more reduced. And it allows for strength work without CNS overload. So we're not going to neurally fatigue ourselves the same way. We're going to be breathing heavy. We're going to be sweating during these sessions, but we are not pushing heavy weight here. Now, with dynamic effort, typically with the lower body, you will see anywhere from 8 to 12 sets of 2 to 3 reps. For the upper body, you'll see 8 to 10, 8 to 12, again, sets of 3 reps, generally. Reason for that is it's typically the duration of the movement. So a max effort squat, 100% 1 RM, takes about the same amount of time as it takes you to do 2 reps of a back squat with dynamic effort. Same thing with upper body. So that's where that all comes from. Other elements with dynamic effort is we are typically going to use some type of accommodating resistance. So that's your bands, that's your chains. Whenever you see those on a bar, typically they're used to help to produce force better because it changes the strength curve. So as you go to lock out that movement, the resistance on the bar is heavier than at the bottom whenever you're weakest. So you can accelerate through the movement in a much better fashion than without bands or chains because the weight at the bottom is lower. So we're accelerating through, we're pushing through. And that's where bands really help with that type of stuff. Now, I will often integrate dynamic effort movement stuff with jumps, with box jumps, broad jumps, even some type of plyometrics like hurdle hops. For the upper body, we'll integrate throws, so med ball throws, med ball slams, and just low volume assistance work at the end. And then the third method is the repetition effort method. This is where we build muscle and we build resilience within the body, within our joints. So purposes here are to improve muscle growth and hypertrophy, to increase local muscular endurance, and to improve joint health, maintain joint health at least. So with repetition, we are using moderate loads, we're doing higher reps, we're nearing technical failure, and we're using controlled tempos. This doesn't mean long, slow eccentrics, but we are going to control the movement throughout the entire range of motion. In terms of moderate loads, anywhere from 40 to 75% of 1 RM. And then with higher reps, we're talking about anywhere from 8 reps all the way up to 25 reps. Goal is to approach or get to technical failure. So this method serves a purpose and to increase the amount of force-producing tissue on your body. Right? The more muscle you have, the more cross bridges you can form, the stronger you can eventually become. It also serves as a protective tissue. Okay? The more tissue you have, the more resilient you're going to be to bumps, falls, dings, whatever may come your way. And we're also going to have better structural integrity to move fast whenever we're running, whenever we're moving through space at a rapid pace and injury risk increases. The more muscle we have, the better off our bodies are going to be as a system. And it's also increasing metabolically active tissue. So we are just putting more tissue on our body to improve our abilities to burn body fat. Now, I talked about strength being very important, especially as you age. Repetition effort is also equally as important. Okay, tendon health, injury resistance, muscle preservation, recovery capacity. These are all elements that improve how we age over time. They improve our ability to, as we are older, to take a fall, to take a hit, to take a little ding, right? The more muscle we have, the stronger we are. Better, again, we can move our limbs through space to avoid getting hurt and to avoid putting ourselves in those situations that are going to injure us. Now, there's a key distinction with repetition effort method, and that is it's not junk volume. It's not adding work. It's not adding more reps and more sets to just become fatigued. It is designed to build muscle and to build hypertrophy. We can target muscle groups with this type of stuff. This is where bodybuilding work comes into play with our strength work. We can hit the shoulders that we're not going to generally hit with our max effort and our dynamic effort movements. We can train the quads and the hamstrings, more isolated, more single muscle group, single joint movements with this type of stuff. And that's where unilateral work comes into play. That's where the accessories come into play. Training our back and the posterior chain, the glutes, the hamstrings, the mid back, the low back, and our trunk musculature. That's what's super important. And that's a method that we can use the repetition effort method with. This is where physique gains come from. This is how we look good and we have that show with the go. Without max effort and without dynamic effort, this becomes bodybuilding. So we build this entire system around these three methods to develop a great strength training, resistance training background to show that we have muscle, to have a good physique, to be able to build strength and be able to produce a lot of force, and then be able to express that strength through powerful, explosive movements. So with those, we have our strength methods. I'd be remiss to not talk about aerobic training and conditioning methods with this as well. I'm not going to dive into all of the conditioning methods. I've written articles about that, and I've done a separate podcast on that topic, but I do want to touch on aerobic training because aerobic work increases our ability to recover. It increases our fatigue management, and it's that baseline work capacity that's critical for being able to recover in between sets during our strength movements, and also at keeping our heart healthy and increasing our longevity. Better aerobic fitness equals better recovery between sets, better tolerance to volume, and a better hormonal environment. We're keeping blood glucose low. We're keeping cortisol down. Right? We're able to dispose of these substrates better. We're able to clear lactate better. So, 3 best bang for your buck methods are zone 2, aerobic capacity, steady state work. Here I look at 30 to 60 minute sessions 2 to 4 times a week. If you can hit 150 minutes at least of aerobic capacity work, staying sub-zone 2 at a heart rate of about 135 beats per minute, then you are going to improve your aerobic capacity. And you're not going to derail your strength work. Best modality is the bike. I think that the ability to repeat it without adding more joint stress to your knees, to your feet, to your calves, and your shins through running, and also just the ability to continually repeat that movement. With the rower, right, there's a recovery during the sets. But on the bike, we can spin and maintain a consistent RPM to continue working throughout that entire 30 to 60 minute session. It has also been shown through research to maintain leg muscles, which is vitally important. We're doing all the strength work. We want to maintain what we're working on. Second method is tempo intervals, where we're using a moderate intensity. We're repeating at a fairly quick pace, whether we're doing this on the bike, whether we're running, whether we're using kettlebells. We're doing intervals that push us to a higher heart rate. We're working a little bit harder. We might be getting above lactate threshold, but then we're putting a stop to that. We're recovering, and then we're going to repeat that again. This is where we start to build better aerobic power, better glycolytic power. And then the third is mixed modality conditioning. This is fun. This is where we can incorporate strongman exercises. We can incorporate sled pushes, sled pulls, bikes, skiers, carries, heavy carries with 100-pound sandbags. We can do med ball slams. We can run and do sprints. We're changing the movement around just to keep things fresh, to keep things fun. Again, there's a goal behind every one of these sessions, and I'm not going to dive into the details of how these sessions look, but we're keeping the orthopedic stress low. We're not tearing up the joints. We're not doing things for prolonged periods where we're risking injury by doing it, but we're adding more movements to keep that type of work fresh. At the end of the day, conditioning helps to support our strength, helps to support our longevity and our health, and it shouldn't compete with the strength work when it's programmed correctly. And what I mean by that is maintaining the resistance and the load with the strength work and the conditioning work, and adding enough time between sessions to make sure that we're not competing with what we're going to do in our conditioning work or our strength work. So now, within a macro cycle, how do these integrate? Ideally, we're going to hit one max effort exposure for the upper body and for the lower body once per week. Same thing with dynamic. One exposure for the upper body and the lower body one time per week. And then repetition effort is every session that we're doing strength, we're training repetition effort as our accessory work. And then we're going to layer the aerobic work around the training stress from the strength work. Within a mesocycle, within a training block, the methods are going to stay constant. We're going to rotate exercises with the max effort work, maybe with the accessory work, but those can stay. But we're going to modulate our volume and change as emphasis changes. So if we are in a more strength-focused block, more strength-focused time of the year, we're going to bias our strength work. If we are in a more conditioning-focused block or a repetition effort, hypertrophy-focused block, we're going to modulate and emphasize those biases. This works for everyday athletes because you never detrain a quality. We're keeping it in year-round. You're also never peaking, so you're never having to deal with that heightened stress of going through a true peak. You're never starting over. You might take a week off of training, but the second that you get back in the gym, from training residuals, you're maintaining those qualities. So you can pick back up right where you left off. And this is where conjugate wins for real life, right? Linear models assume perfect recovery. Block models assume predictable stress. And life is neither. It's not linear. We can't always predict stress. So conjugate, the advantage is there that we are training these multiple qualities simultaneously throughout the year. We have built-in variety and built-in variability, but we're doing it in a controlled and logical fashion. We have flexible weekly structures. We're not losing strength whenever we're trying to lose fat. We're not losing conditioning when we're trying to build strength. Conjugate doesn't chase peaks, but it preserves work capacity. So, our methods are the backbone to our training. The exercises are how you fill in those gaps. And sets and reps serve a purpose. But now we have a system to be able to build a killer strength training program. And we should always maintain that conditioning work as a supportive method, not randomly, not for a hard sweat, but to serve a true purpose and to build and work with our strength and resistance training work. So now you should truly understand how to develop a true, well-rounded training program. You can listen back to episodes 1 through 4 to dive into the methods that we talked about today and kind of get a background of how to build out this training program over the course of the year, over the course of the next 10, 15, 20 years. That's the thing. We talk about goals and setting goals, and this is that framework for setting those goals. And now you have the roadmap to be able to program yourself the ability to train to meet those goals. I also would encourage you to reevaluate your current program. If you are following a program, is it using methods that are similar to what we talked about today? Or is there random work? Is there guesswork plugged in and out? Maybe not everything to a T, right? They may not call it max effort work, but are you seeing the elements of strength? Are you seeing the elements of hypertrophy and of power and of conditioning within your training plan or your training program? If not, reevaluate where that's coming from and maybe seek out better programs that do incorporate that. Ultimately, you should be asking yourself whenever you're doing an exercise, what method is this serving? What goal, what adaptation is this achieving? So thanks for listening to the Everyday Strength Podcast. If today's episode helped you learn something, do me a favor and make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. This helps the show grow and it ensures that you never miss an episode. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment. I read all of them. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, then a quick 5-star review goes a long way in pushing this information to more people. If you want to go deeper, then join the Performance Edge Network. It's free to join and it gets you access to my weekly newsletter, which is full of training breakdowns, physiology deep dives, and tools that you can apply immediately to become a stronger, fitter, higher performing everyday athlete. And if you're ready for structured programming, then I've got options for whatever path you're on. The Peak Performance Training Program is my flagship strength and conditioning program. And I also offer Peak 3X, which is a 3-day per week version for busier athletes, along with other programs designed for hybrid competitors, runners, and anyone who wants to train like an athlete year-round. You can find all those and more at HagleyStrength.com. I appreciate you being here. Keep training hard, and I'll see you in the next episode.